Welcome to Hunkered Down with Seth. This is show number 51 to 53, and I have somebody that I'm very excited to reconnect with. This show really was to stay in touch with people, but also reconnect with people who I have not spoken to, and I have not spoken to this gentleman in a decade. He has a podcast called Blake's Takes, for God's sakes, in not one, not two, not four, but three albums on iTunes. The first one is Blake's album. Second one is 12 Years of Voicemails with Todd Glass. And the third one, the most recent one, is Stuffed Boy. Definitely check them all out, and I could assure you that this guy makes me laugh on stage and off stage harder than almost anybody. But I haven't talked to him since in about 10 years, so let's see what he's up to. Blake Wexler. Blake, after all that, I'm out of breath. What's up?
Oh man, thank you. That was such a kind intro, and it is really great to hear from you. Obviously I follow you on social media and stuff, but it is getting that DM from you to see if I wanted to do this. Answer was obviously I'm excited to catch up.
Oh, definitely. And this is something like when I started the show, you're one of those people who I was a little scared to message just because it's like we haven't talked to it in a decade, but it's like, oh, he's Blake. He's a good guy.
Oh, no. There was no fear warranted whatsoever. Yeah, no, I was excited when I saw your name pop up on my phone. And then, because the last time, I mean, we probably bumped into each other since then, but it was the Seattle Festival, right? That...
The Seattle Comedy Competition.
Met, right?
Yep.
No, excuse us. I'm sorry. The International. We need to, that's on us. The International Comedy Competition, because I believe someone from Toronto was in it 8 years ago.
I remember maybe 4 people who were in that, but mainly because I was so god-awful for almost every show.
Oh, same. Dude, it was one of the hard, I mean, I had a blast. I got to meet, people people like you and Will Weldon, Eric Krug, and Heather. There were actually tons of people. Scott Moran, just a lot of great comics at that week. Yep. But it was social. It was purely social because I had some of the worst sets of my entire goddamn life during that week of that competition. But it was cool being in Seattle, which for the one show that was actually there.
Yeah, it's funny because all the shows, Seattle's such a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's such an anomaly for the surrounding areas. And the one show in Seattle was the only show that I did well. And everywhere else, there was one show where I think the average audience that we performed of, their average age was in the 50s. And
yes, it was in that weird theater, right? Actually, it was actually kind of a nice theater, I think. But the show was so weird. It was so it was. Didn't we have to drive onto a boat or something to get there?
Yeah, definitely a ferry, and
yeah, it is weird when you're going to a show and you have to take 2 modes of transportation concurrently to get there. Being in a car on a boat is a very odd means to travel.
Yeah, I went car, boat for that show particularly. Car, boat, rickshaw, subway.
Right.
And then ostrich.
Zipline.
Yeah, zipline. But my main memory from that competition was Mike Baldwin, who, great comic, wiped the floor with all of us. I think he got second on the first night and didn't get lower than first throughout the rest of the competition. But he
was a beast.
Yeah, on the last show of the R week, the preliminary week, he did his merch set, got first, and also sold 2 T-shirts in a competition.
See, that's why you have to, obviously it is by name a competition and it is competitive, but even if someone comes in first and mops the whole floor with you, the guy still had this sense, he was so likable that he had the sense of humor to do a merch set in a competition and sell things, which was fucking hilarious. What I remember, I don't know if you remember this for that last show, but I was mathematically eliminated, and then from moving on, and then Eric Krug, I believe, was mathematically in the finals no matter what. So they had this thing, for those of you who don't know, called not a graduation point, like an encore point or something.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Where you would go backstage, and then if the audience clapped for enough time, you would come back out and like you'd get an extra point. It was kind of humiliating. And I was like, hey, how funny it would be if like you went backstage and just like emerged in a completely different outfit, you know, like just for no reason, because you're back there for what, 15 seconds at most. And then Eric was like, what if we just came out naked? And I was like, well, I'm not doing that. But what if we came out like in our we negotiated to boxers. So I was like fully clothed, did my set, went backstage for the encore point, and then Eric and I like came out in our boxers holding hands and did a bow, and then some guy in all camo in the front row just went, "Are you two fucking kidding me?" Like he was so goddamn angry, and that actually made in addition to the friendships, that made the trip up to Seattle worth it. Did you start in Seattle or Portland?
I actually started in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but 6 months into my comedy career, I moved to Seattle because the Milwaukee scene at the time was 2 open mics and casinos, and the casinos didn't have open mics. So.
Oh my God! Can you imagine doing an open mic at a casino?
Oh God, that would be the worst.
The appeal of a casino is that they pay a lot often, but I would imagine, I wouldn't know from firsthand experience, but God, imagine, just the sound of the slots as you're bombing in a casino. Jesus.
It's not just an open mic. I mean, casino gigs, you basically do it for the money, and they're good because they pay, but they're bad because of everything else.
Literally everything else.
Yeah. I mean, although I will say there are some really good comics. I'll drop a few names. Kermit Apio, and let's see, Kermit Apio, Jeff Lott, Dwayne Goad. You know, these are the Seattle local headliners who have mastered the art of the casino shows, where they could, get the blue-haired gamblers, chain smokers in and really have a good show. So there is a secret. It's to be a middle-aged dad.
Right. With like no capacity to feel. Obviously I'm not talking about them, but it is. There is a certain thing where like these hell gigs, if they pay enough, you can just be like, all right, in an hour and 59 minutes, this will be over, and I will have this amount of money, and I can go back to my life. But it is really hard to disassociate like that. When the whole reason to do stand-up is to feel and like have an audience there. So they're tricky.
But I do say, if it pays, no matter what, it's a great gig.
Yes, I like that. I like that too.
Yeah, the worst casino gig, if it pays, it's still great. It's still better than 2 drink tickets.
There is a benefit. Right, exactly.
Yeah. So you've been touring, correct?
On and off, yeah. Like, so I'll like spend a long time in LA, and then I do a fair amount of road work, not as much as tons of other people, but what I'll do often is like I'm kind of at the age, a little past it, where all my friends are getting married. So a lot of my road work, I work around weddings. So I'll like have a friend getting married in Detroit or something. So it's like, okay, I'll come a few days early and do like some of the off nights at the comedy club there, or if it's like an independent little theater, do like, I'll be there for Friday night, 2 shows. Saturday is the wedding, and like Sunday I actually get a chance to see the city, and then I get the hell out of there. So you can actually make a little money on a trip like that rather than, lose money, I guess, on a wedding. So that's often how I tour. When I was doing the road more, we kind of talked about the names that we like to kindly place on the ground or drop. I would open for Todd, when I was younger. But
Todd Glass.
I don't do
for
that.
Our viewers.
Sorry, yes, sorry. I'm the fucking worst guest ever. I'm just using first names. Anyone knows?
Yeah, Jeff. I opened for Jeff.
Yeah, I opened for Jeff. And it's not like, who? Todd Barry, Todd, Phil. Is Todd Phillips a comedian, or is he Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Todd Helton.
Yeah. Oh, yes, yes. I was hoping for Todd Helton on the road. Very high bat. He actually only does well in thin air comedy clubs. He only does well in Colorado.
He only does well in Denver, but he does great in Denver.
Oh my God, does he hit? Does he hit for a high average in that place? So I don't do the road too much, but when I do, it's usually like a city that I want to go. Like I want to go to. Like I won't go to like the Virginia Beach Funny Bones. So I guess I'm kind of privileged that way.
Hey, if it pays.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So my question I asked that every person, comic, musician, anything. What is the craziest show that you've either seen or been a part of?
The craziest one was I started stand-up very young when I was in high school, and I was still doing it in college, and it was not. It was crazy in terms of expectation versus it and like ignorance versus what the reality of the situation was, where it turned out being one of my favorite shows I've ever done, but and you'll see what I mean through like my own ignorance, but I was going to do a show in Boston, and it was just like at the point in my life, which I'm still there often, but someone was like, hey, do you want to do my show? And I was like, yeah, just give me the address. And the show, I figured it was just going to be a bar show, but it was a show at a shelter for people with AIDS, and
Whoa.
they were on their way out, essentially. So they were like terminally ill, and it was I'm a very sensitive person, and just being around people who you need to mentally fucking prepare yourself for something like that. It's not just something you just drop in a text like 15 minutes before the show.
BTW.
And by the way, your audience, they have 3 months to live. And it's like, Jesus Christ. And like, I got there and it was, like shows, I've done shows in like weirder event, like in terms of like a physical setup. So there was no microphone, and normally that would be the strangest part of a show, but it was very intense, because like you're trying to do your jokes, but you can't help but feeling for these people there. So it was one of the oddest shows. And then before it started, and I'm saying thank God, like for like selfishly, where they're like, hey Blake, like sorry, I know we told you could do 20, but like we have to cut it short. Can you do 5? I'm like, I'll do 3. And it was actually, they were great. I did 2 jokes, and ended up being really like sweet and fulfilling. But it was just such a fucking bizarre experience. It was really weird. Yeah.
Did you set up a merch table?
I did. I tried to sell them a timeshare.
Yeah.
Right after the show, and there were no buyers, unfortunately. But yeah, they ended up being, I set up a merch, the most tone deaf thing to do.
Yeah.
After a 4-minute set, just being like, by the way, I am selling that. I do a merch set. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I got some T-shirts I'm trying to sell.
I'm sure you've given yours before, like, or else I would ask you what yours is on the podcast.
You're actually the first. You're actually the first to ask.
Oh, please tell me.
It's also the worst show I've ever done, because it was a open mic comedy / open mic burlesque.
Oh yeah, you didn't stand a chance.
And first of all, I have no issues with burlesque. Those people work hard. Their expression, they're very kind. They were all cool to me.
Yeah, of course. Just a different thing.
But the entire audience, literally the entire audience, was there for the burlesque. Just a bunch of like late 20s, early 30s drunk single guys who are there to see burlesque. And this was maybe a year and a half in. And I was a late bloomer in being funny, so I was god awful.
Right.
But they were god awful too.
Well, everyone is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, always say there's no such thing as a bad audience, but this is as close as it gets to being a bad. So.
Oh, I disagree. I think there for sure are bad audiences. I think you should never use it as like an excuse.
Yeah.
But or for something wrong that you did. But I for sure think you could do everything right sometimes, and there are bad audiences. For instance, what you just described.
Yeah.
So when did you what were some of the things that made it? I mean, obviously, other than you were doomed from that audience.
This is how bad it was. I said at the end of my 5-minute open mic set, I said, "Thank you, good night." Literally zero applause, not even crickets. There was just nothing. The host says, "Seth Lazier, everybody." Still nothing. Like, nobody, not one sound.
Just apathy.
Exactly. I might as well been, doing comedy outside of that place. And I would have gotten the same reaction from the audience.
So this was was this in Milwaukee or Seattle?
Oh, this was Seattle. This was at Neighbors. It's a legendary gay bar, but for some reason they decided to have an afternoon open mic, burlesque, and comedy.
They decided to completely change their business model for one afternoon.
Yeah. And, I've done comedy in gay bars, too, and it's a lot of fun. Oh,
yeah.
The one thing I realize is when I go to a gay bar, regardless if it's for comedy or not, and when I go, it's always with a gay friend. I'm not a tourist. It's whenever I go, I realize I'm a guest there, and this is a place where they're going to relax and just be comfortable. So just, be
interesting.
Best
behavior.
Exactly, best behavior, nice to everybody. Just be friendly, especially if you're doing comedy.
Right. I like that. I like that as saying that you're a guest there. I think that's a really good way of putting it.
Oh, for sure. It's like if you walk into a synagogue, you realize these people, live this lifestyle, that do this stuff. Why ruffle any feathers?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I have this similar, the few times that I've done, if there's there will be all female shows out here, and sometimes they'll have, one guy on it, you know what I mean? So, if I'm the guy, it's like, you know what, just it's literally best behavior. And not that I have any material that is, misogynist or
Chicks, bro.
edgy in that sort of way, but what'd you say?
Chicks, bro. Chicks.
Yeah, oh my God, dude, thank you. Hey, when it's you and I talking, that's all we say. But at these shows, I put that shit away. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, no, I think being a guest, great. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, let's jump into your podcast, Blake's Takes, for God's sakes.
Yes.
So, give us a little rundown on it, and let's talk more about it.
Well, that is a thing that was essentially the premise of the podcast, is that each week I take a current event from the 4 subjects of politics, sports, relationships, and leisure is the last one, and then I give a take on it. So it's either a serious, thoughtful thing, or I have some sort of bizarre take that I try to argue that I don't actually believe in, FDR should not have run for a 4th term, was one of them. So, but yeah, it's really, really fun. And it's the thing I had planned for a while. I just didn't have time to do it. And then, the pandemic happened. So I just decided, all right, do it right. And got all the equipment. And it's been really good. I don't have guests. It's just me. So I speak for 40 to 45 minutes straight. So while I can't do a headlining set right now, obviously, it has been productive in a way outside of the podcast that it keeps your speaking stamina going, where, there's still a timer in your head where you're like, oh, I've been speaking for a while, it's time to be funny here, or put a joke in here, or something like that, or a riff. So, it's been really actually much more fulfilling than I thought it would be.
Yeah, it's your platform, it's your soapbox.
Right, yes, it is my pulpit.
Yeah. So what was your last?
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, what was your last topic?
So this week the topics were for politics. Now it is interesting that launching a current events podcast right now probably couldn't have been a worse fucking timing for it.
Yeah.
So a lot of the current events, I've been playing with the current event thing a little bit. So one take was that old Deuteronomy from Cats, who is the leader of the Cats, should have been impeached. The next take was for sports, like what the most difficult professional sports would be to play while intoxicated. And then relationships was I gave my takes on all the different words for sex and just how disgusting most of them are. And then for leisure, I kind of gave my take on how this was the serious one where I see stand up going, until there's a vaccine for this thing.
Oh wow. Well, if I were to give my opinion on the
Yeah, please.
hardest sport to do while intoxicated, um, NASCAR would be my number one.
Oh, it's so fun. Yeah, I would say that would probably be the most dangerous one.
Or maybe Formula One with Monaco going 300 and then you got to stop and do the curve. I mean, it's.
God, that's so funny. I didn't do vehicle sports, but you're right. That's the Tour de France. You're going down a mountain at 60 miles per hour on a bicycle. Yeah. Just fall down drunk, literally. But yeah, it's. God, NASCAR's real. God, can you fucking imagine? That is that's it's so bad. It's almost not funny. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's intentionally got a DUI. What was your pick for the hardest sport to do drunk?
So it was the most dangerous one I picked was baseball because the pitchers still throw 100 miles per hour and they just can't control it anymore. And then the bats can slip out of the players' hands. And then the other aspect of this is that all the fans are drunk too at these things. So drunk fans it's already dangerous being in a baseball stadium if you're not paying attention, and then these people are drunk and not paying attention. So that was number one. And then the oddest placement I had for something is that I didn't think football, pro football would be that dangerous because they're wearing all these pads and would be more slipping and falling, and clumsiness rather than you can't take a beeline to a running back as a safety. If you're drunk, you're just gonna run right past them. Yeah. So I didn't think that was that would be that dangerous of one.
Or just trip over your feet and fall, and then try to get up.
Right.
And just
right.
sit
You're
there.
wearing all those pads. You'll be fine. If you, maybe they won't even get up. They'll just fall asleep on the ground. Just roll them out of the way.
Yeah. So rounding third and coming home for this podcast, you did mention where you thought stand-up would be heading as the serious topic. Where do you think stand-up is heading? And give us a little preview of your full Blake's Takes, for God's sake, so people could go and listen to the actual thing.
I love it. So, yeah, I mean, just speaking to you, as a human being, this is my same take, but I won't do it exactly. I don't even think I can remember it. But essentially, my overall thought is that, first, the depressing part is that as these clubs open back up, it's very hard to get booked as a comedian in general, and it's often, you're booked in waves, every 3 months. You can do a local show in LA, for instance, and then at comedy clubs, you can generally do it as a headliner only once a year, as a feature act maybe 2 or 3 times a year. But now, because everyone's open at the same time, so you can kind of circulate through all these clubs. But now, I think there's going to be a huge bottleneck where comedians who were doing theaters before, theaters aren't going to open up right away. So you have these huge acts, and I think they're going to move down to do comedy clubs, which then pushes comedy club headliners down to doing, maybe feature work every once in a while. And then you have features being pushed down to host and hosts being pushed down. So that is the depressing thought that I have right now, that there could be a bottleneck there. But the exciting thing is that I do think that because these clubs are going to get so overwhelmed, there's going to be some really cool venues and like places for shows to happen that are untraditional. And I think because of podcasts where you like, just you can hear these veteran stand-ups talk about what makes a great show, people are going to be able to create these cool venues that, like in a backyard or a parking lot, or, and that sounds like hell, but you can, set those up in a cool, creative way. And I think audiences are going to be so starved for live performances where there might almost be a second, or I guess a third comedy boom where, like they're going to be starved for live performances, and stand-up is the least expensive out of, concerts and live music performances for the most part. So I think that I'm really, really excited about, to be like, hey, I'm doing stand-up at, this fucking weird field tonight. Everyone can be safely placed around and, with the sun setting behind you. And I think there is that part I'm like really, really psyched about, because, I think the thing that adding competition to clubs and traditional venues can only be good, because they'll have to step their games up and everyone will have to step their game up. And I think it's just going to make for an even cooler community once there's a vaccine and we're on the other side of this. So that is that's like the happy part of it.
Oh, for sure. And I think there's going to be, in the major cities, New York, LA, Chicago, all the people who are in there to pursue comedy, a lot of those people move back home because they just couldn't afford to be here. So not only will there'll be more opportunities for comics in the big cities, I think the people who move back to the smaller places like Wichita, Milwaukee, all that stuff, they'll realize that they could start stuff in their own city and actually create these little pocket comedy booms as well. So I think,
dude, and I really like, that would be amazing, because I think, I hope that the emphasis being placed on being in New York or LA, not that those aren't like amazing cities. I love it. I love LA. I love New York. But I really do hope that, why shouldn't, like you said, like Wichita or something, have like their local guys stay and have a really cool experience there too. So that would be amazing if that ends up happening.
Oh, for sure. And it's also these big guys, they'll figure stuff out. Like, I'm sure Dave Chappelle and his management will have, like, this plan to hit up all these cities, like, these nice one-nighters. And I always believe, even with Dane Cook, what's good for the goose is good for the ganders. Because if Dane Cook does a 20,000-seat venue, that's 20,000 people watching stand-up comedy. And even though I'm not a fan of his material, I respect his hustle. So...
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt, if they're like, oh, this stand-up looks cool. I don't know if I like this type, but I like this art. Let's see if there's another version of it around. And then they see Seth is performing nearby, and they see you, and they're like, oh yeah, this is more of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, short hairy Jews. That's my demographic.
Yes, it should be everybody's.
Great. All right, so let's wrap it up. Is there any last words? Because I really want to hang out with you when, things sort of get back to being healthy to go outside.
Yeah, likewise. Like, I run a show on Sundays in LA. Like, I'd love for you to do it when that comes back. So, either that way or, like, Long Beach isn't too far away. So, I would love to hang out in person once, things return.
And that's what I love about living in Long Beach. I live just far enough where it's a hassle to get to.
Yes.
So I can keep all my LA friends at a distance.
I love that.
And to wrap up, I just want to tell you a Todd Glass story that I have experienced. I know I told you 10 years ago, but I don't know if you remember it.
No, please tell it again.
So, years and years ago, this was probably 2009 or something, Todd Glass was going to be on Kimmel, and I was a huge comedy nerd, so Todd Glass was basically heroin to me. It's like, hey, this guy is a great comic, and I was telling my roommates, hey, we should all watch my buddy Todd on, I say my buddy, quote unquote, I never met him.
Of course.
I was like, we should watch Todd Glass, he's a great comic, He's going to be on Kimmel. And they're like, I don't know, we got to get up in the morning. I'm like, guys, don't worry, he's great. Let's watch the set. So they stayed up, and this is Pacific time, so it's 12:30 when the show starts. So he doesn't go on until about 1:30. And he just has the weirdest set. Like, weird. I don't know if you remember this specific
Was
Kimmel.
he singing for that one or no?
Maybe, I think so.
Okay.
So he had this weird, sort of borderline lunacy set. And then the show ended, and my roommates were a little bit pissed. They were like, "Hey Seth, your buddy bombed," and I just looked at him and said, "Yeah, well, when my buddies bomb, they bomb on national TV." And just that made it all worth it.
I love that. That's such a great line.
Definitely. Oh, Blake Wexler.
That's awesome.
Don't forget to pick up all 3 of his albums. Listen to the podcast. Any last words for the quintillions of audience members?
This was really great. Huge fan of yours, Seth, and yeah, man, I can't wait to hang out in person. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for talking to me too, and thank you in the audience for watching Hunkered Down with Seth.